Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com coming at you from the MMA Bunker. Just saw an epic Nevada State Athletic Commission hearing. Been live blogging that for the last couple hours. I don't know. I gotta say, they first up, quick summary. Wanderlei Silva, legendary MMA fighter, former Pride champion, UFC superstar, Ultimate Fighter coach. Once a fan favorite, now banned for life by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. They voted to indefinitely suspend him, imposed a massive, I believe, $200,000 fine. Let me double check what the fine was. Fine was massive, though, either way. And just a serious death blow to Wanderlei's claims Friday when he put out a video announcing his retirement, which the timing of that, completely transparent effort to diffuse what was coming at this hearing by getting out ahead of it. Should have done it a week earlier at least, if not more. He had to know this was coming. I mean, as soon as he fled, and the deal is Silva's sin was that he fled from drug testing. Agents of the Nevada State Athletic Commission approached him, I believe, in April, could have been in January. These things are pretty immaterial at this point, but approached him seeking blood and urine samples, and he fled, and then fled the country. He later came out and said he was on diuretics as he was healing from another fight, and his argument is basically, look, I wasn't licensed by Nevada at the time. They did not have the right to test me. The commission rejects that out of hand. Silva's lawyer, after the hearing, told Josh Gross that it was a kangaroo court and that he would be taking his case to district court, which is probably a losing bet. We've seen Nick Diaz and others go to court against the NSAC, and it never goes well. Let me see what that fine was. And I'm still introducing the segment because I'm an all-pro. Like, this isn't just amateur hour here, even though zero viewers as of yet. I didn't tweet it out or anything. But and he was fined $70,000. They considered fining him a full $200,000, which would have been his full purse. At the same hearing, Floyd Mayweather, the boxing champ, had to admit that his all-access special was basically fake, that the sparring sessions were manipulated and edited, and that the marijuana smoking scene at his house was prop marijuana. And more importantly, UFC light heavyweight champ John Jones and his opponent at UFC 182, Daniel Cormier, were fined each 10% of his purse. For Cormier, that was $9,000. For Jones, that was a hefty $50,000 for engaging in a brawl at a UFC 178 Media Day event a month ago, back on August 4th. So let's go in order. Start with the minor things first. Plus, some boxer got popped for a 40-to-1 testosterone to epitestosterone ratio. That is the highest I am aware of the NSAC ever being confronted with. Anyway, the commission, they get a bad rap. Okay, I mean, it's easy to make fun of the commissioners. They're civil servants. They're doing this in their spare time, frankly. I mean, the position's sort of an honorific for somebody who's been active in Nevada state politics and who cares about the sport. But these are busy people. These are generally people who've got successful careers and businesses going. They take time out of their day and their day jobs. This is not their day job for the most part. They have other things on their plate. They take time out to do these hearings. They don't get a lot of institutional support. It's not like they have an enormous staff researching them and briefing them and prepping them. Pretty much I get the feeling that what you see at the hearings is what they're told. That's all the info they get. They get some paperwork in advance to read up on the case. But this isn't some huge governmental multi-gazillion-dollar entity that has a huge staff. This isn't the Department of Defense or the Department of Treasury or anything like that. This is a state organization, and Nevada, has one of the bigger state athletic commissions. But come on, is this really where you want your tax dollars going? No. They want to do this with the minimum amount of fuss, make the maximum amount of money off boxing and UFC events held in their state, regulate it to meet a minimum standards of decorum and professionalism so that they're not ashamed to have these events in their state, so that fighters aren't dying, so that blatant cheating isn't going on, so that fixed fights aren't happening. Nevada's a big gambling state. Gambling's legal there, of course, so they got to keep an eye on all that shit. So they're just trying to get by with limited resources, and they're going up against these fighters who are paid tons of money. In some instances, some of the fighters make nothing, but when you're talking about John Jones in particular, and to a lesser extent Wanderlei Silva and Daniel Cormier, these guys have resources. This is all they have time to do. This is their top priority. So they've got some time and can invest some resources in this stuff. So commissioners are kind of fighting an uphill battle. Anyway, on the whole, the Mayweather thing I thought was pretty stupid, but I think they had to look into it just because he was, on Showtime, and there were some media reports, et cetera, et cetera. And politicians are driven by the media. Never doubt that. If a politician sees a clip, and all politicians at a certain level get briefs every day with sets of links to click on or printouts if they're dinosaurs to read. And here's the news that matters. And when they see their name or something they're in charge of getting bad press, memos fly, calls are made. If you're the Nevada State Athletic Commissioner and Floyd Mayweather, there's a news article in the Las Vegas Review Journal saying he smoked pot and had illegally long sparring sessions, because they're limited to, I believe, 30-minute sessions, so they don't injure their brain unduly. And so, they had to check these things out. Fine. They handled that fine. Then they get to Jones and Cormier. And here's the thing, they don't want to shut the shit down, because Cormier and Jones having that brawl on August 4th took what was a medium-sized UFC pay-per-view and made it into what could have been a huge one. And unfortunately, that would have been this Saturday, but Jones got hurt, so it's been pushed back to January. So the drought for major UFC events continues. 2014 is just looking like a cursed year for the UFC, with Chris Weidman getting his hand broken yesterday and pulling out of that event. But anyway, that's a non sequitur or a tangent. The commission's job is to maximize revenue for the state. At the same time, they can't be having fighters having brawls in the MGM lobby at media day events, at stare downs, at photo ops. So they've got to show they're serious about basically preventing more of these incidents from happening. I mean, this was a special event. These two guys just lost their shit because they really hate each other, and they just pushed each other too far. So it wasn't planned. It wasn't some scam, and it's not something that we're going to see happening again, and the commission just put in a 10% fine. Now, if you're these fighters, they're probably going to get more than a 10% bump in pay-per-view numbers, which, especially for John Jones, who definitely gets a percentage of the pay-per-views, that's probably good math. Now, the other news that came out of this was he claims that he lost his Nike sponsorship. What he claims was a six-figure Nike sponsorship. Now, we all know from watching The Ultimate Fighter over these years that these six-figure contracts, I mean, that could be over the life of a contract, So that six-figure might have been over 3 or 4 years. We don't know. By all accounts that I've heard, this was not one of the biggest sponsorship deals in Nike's history. In fact, I've heard at various times it was sort of a pay-for-play deal, or take it and trade, where he gets product, he gets his name, they get to sponsor him. But he wasn't moving any units anyway. I'm extremely skeptical of this claim that he lost that sponsorship to the brawl. I mean, I don't think it helped him any, but I think the real reason he lost the sponsorship is because he's just not a big name. The UFC's cold. John Jones has been cold ever since UFC 151 was canceled, and they threw him in the grease for that. The UFC's popularity has been basically in free fall all this year. Had a record event at 168 in December of 2013, but that was kind of a one-off. Anderson Silva snapping his leg, but that wasn't something you could build on. Chris Weidman didn't come out of that a superstar. Ronda Rousey didn't come out of that a superstar. Sure, she gets a lot of media attention, but she's not selling huge numbers of pay-per-views. So for Jones and Cormier, the calculation on this is that brawl, which made fans much more interested in it. And I can tell you from our web traffic that brawl was one of the biggest things that happened in MMA all year in terms of fan interest. And so for Jones taking a 10% cut to get possibly double the money he would have got before, it's pretty easy math. I have no idea. Again, this is all speculation. I'm just a fan like you. I just happen to do nothing else except watch the UFC. So that's what it is. I'm not like an expert insider. In fact, I try to avoid getting inside information, because I just want to bring you a fan experience. Just a kid watching this, a 45-year-old kid watching this from the other side of the screen, reading about it online. Try to keep the minimum. I edit reporters and have to deal with these stories, so I hear things that I would prefer not to be hearing, but that's part of my job. Anyway, so for Cormier and Jones, I think everybody did a reasonable thing. I don't believe that this was a planned brawl. I believe their stories. Jones claimed, he just planned to do head-to-head contact. Cormier claims that he freaks out when somebody taller than him and bigger than him looms over him like that. He said in his testimony that when Bigfoot Silva did that at a previous fight, that it really freaked him out, and that he was freaked out backstage afterwards. And that with Jones, when you have the added, because Cormier has a history of being bullied as a child. I was bullied as a child. I know how that goes. It puts a permanent chip on your shoulder, little man syndrome they call it. Cormier has given up a lot of height. He's like 5'8". Jones is 6'4". So when he saw this big dude looming over and putting his head on his head, it freaked him out, and he put his hand on Jones's throat. That freaked Jones out, and he said, the testimony that he felt it's a one-upmanship thing. He couldn't let Cormier, escalate, put his hands on him without doing something to further escalate and keep his dominance. These guys are in a very brittle position because they've got to fight each other psychologically and also play to the crowd. They're both, Jones talked about how he's been champ a long time, and he's very aware of social media and how people will take these things, and he knows that he's playing to the crowd. And so, just one of these situations. Cormier said he thought that the fact that Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier had a very heated stare-off right before this fed into that, and the fact that 70% of the people there were crowded around Jones. He felt like Jones was feeding off that crowd energy and feeding off the McGregor-Poirier stare down, and that the intensity just flew from there. I believe it. The commissioners also said the fact that Dana White wasn't there was a factor. Dave Scholler's a great press guy, but he just doesn't have the gravitas of Dana White, the persona of Dana White. I mean, everybody's afraid of Dana White. He's the king of the sport, and physically he's a much more imposing person than Scholler. And so, he's got more experience with this situation, and probably would have kept him separate or been quicker to separate him. And I think they would have been much less. They would not have shoved Dana White to the side the way they did Dave Scholler. Anyway, so all is well and good there. The commission did what they had to do. Appearances were preserved. They took steps that should hopefully minimize. I mean, what they want to avoid is brawls like this erupting. Every jackass fighter trying to start a brawl at his stare down to hype his event. And you've seen, from like the Stephan Bonner Tito Ortiz thing and the Bellator event, fighters are freelancing their own promos. Okay, Stephan Bonner, by all accounts, came up, and I believe it, came up with the masked Justin McCulley angle by himself, which isn't surprising because it was terrible. So he's a dumbass fighter freelancing trying to promote his fight. And so fighters aren't that smart. They're not that great at promos. They will try to imitate others and do stupid shit. So they've got to keep this down so that little fighters got to know, if you're not a big name, you will not get away with this shit, period, ever. And if you are a big name, it will be a significant fine. I mean, 10% of your purse, because of the pay-per-view money is kind of the hidden iceberg. It ultimately might be profitable for Jones and Cormier. It will be profitable for Jones and Cormier ultimately, but it's not something they want to see happening before every fight. So that's all well and good. But then you get Wanderlei Silva. Silva didn't even show up for this hearing. He showed up at one in June. The first bit was a motion to dismiss the Goodman, Ross Goodman's attempt to claim that the NSAC didn't have authority because Silva wasn't licensed in the state, even though he was scheduled to fight. I think that's a fairly specious argument, but I'm not a judge. And Goodman's talking about taking this to district court. If I recall correctly, Goodman also took represented Nick Diaz in his marijuana claim before the NSAC, and went to district court. And I'm looking that up online. And that went nowhere. That did nothing but make Ross Goodman money. And so, if he wants to do that again, he's not going to get Wanderlei Silva restored. I just don't see any chance he can do that. And I think the NSCC did what they had to do. They cannot have any kind of credible drug testing program if fighters are allowed to abscond as soon as they see an agent of the NSAC coming to give them a test. Now, Alistair Overeem did this fairly successfully. The first time they tried to test him, they called the gym and he was like, "Oh, my mom's dying. I got to fly to the Netherlands." And then the next time when they caught him at the press conference with Junior Dos Santos, he was trying to flee the building, and they caught him, I believe, outside in the parking lot. So they can't have this bullshit. They've got to send a clear message to fighters. Look, if you see us coming, give us the samples, take your medicine, because you'll lose your license to fight, period, permanently. They suspended Chael Sonnen for 2 years, and he took the test. He gave him the urine and piss samples. Now, he failed for a bunch of stuff, though. I think if Silva had just took his medicine, given the sample, if all he'd been doing was diuretics like he claimed, would have been a 6-month suspension and a $10,000 fine, something like that. Instead, he's looking at a lifetime suspension, having to retire. And here's the more important thing. The reason I'm talking about this, I talked about this a little bit in the Bathrobe Review of UFC Japan on Sunday morning. I mean, Wanderlei on Friday puts out this video claiming, he's going to be the spokesman for fighter grievances against the UFC, but doing it right before you get killed for a cause, right before you get banned from the sport for life for cause, for a good reason, for fleeing a drug test, for refusing to cooperate with the drug testing of the sport. You have zero credibility, dude. I'm sorry. I sympathize with a ton of the things that Silva said about the UFC taking the majority of the money. That seems to be true by all accounts that I've read and believe. The UFC treating fighters with a lack of respect, I agree with that too. However, Wanderlei Silva is not the spokesman fighters need, man. Here's a guy who reigned back in the days of Pride in Japan, which, Pride's an organization that was linked to the Yakuza in Japan. Organized crime links killed that organization. I'm not saying Wanderlei personally had any links with organized crime, but he worked for a promotion that did. That was where he made his bread and butter, and a promotion that did zero drug testing. Now, look, that's fine and dandy. Things were different then, and that was the sport. I'm not condemning everybody who competed in those days, or even steroids. I honestly don't give a shit if fighters use steroids. I just think they should be drug tested and be upfront about what they're on. I do think they should be banned from using painkillers in the ring or methamphetamine, something like that that's got a massive health risk and presents you with an immediate advantage. With steroids, I think the jury's still out. We just haven't done the medical research to know. I don't feel comfortable saying, hey, these things cause irreparable harm. I don't know that they cause fighters to be so strong, so much stronger that they present a great danger to other fighters. Maybe they do, but we just haven't had the research to know that. And so I'm just saying I'm not like a zealot about steroids. However, if you are going to have a drug testing program, you've got to enforce it in a serious way. Wanderlei Silva flouted the commission, and they had to do that. He backed him into a corner, and they had to do what they had to do. So totally predictable. And if this was the only thing Wanderlei had done in the last couple of years to make himself look like a jackass, it would be one thing. But on top of that, he was such a jackass on The Ultimate Fighter in Brazil when he coached against Chael Sonnen that the Brazilian fans actually started rooting for Chael. I mean, talk about an epic fail. I mean, Chael comes in with this reputation as a racist, an enemy of the Brazilian people, bitter rivalry of Anderson Silva, and had done all kinds of trash talking about Brazilian fighters and Brazil as a country. And then for Wanderlei to behave so badly, engaging in a brawl on the set for one thing, a brawl in which one of his coaches, Andre Dida, punched Chael in the back of the head, completely unsportsmanlike, and then just came off as a glowering goon and bully, whereas Chael's much smarter than Wanderlei apparently, and managed to charm the Brazilian audiences just like he charms American fans. I mean, I've said before, I've said many times, Chael, if you're watching, this isn't news, I believe Chael's a sociopath. I believe he's a chronic pathological liar. But I also think he's a smart guy. I think he's a charming guy. He's always been very nice to me in my dealings with him, which is exceptional for an MMA fighter, especially somebody I've said brutal truths about. So, Chael's charming, like many a sociopath. And again, I don't have a medical diagnosis to say he's a sociopath. I'm just saying he's a convicted felon for fraud. He's a recidivist drug test failure. He's got a record of lying under oath. He lied to the California State Athletic Commission. He lied on TV about his drug test failures. So, I'm saying he fits the pattern of sociopathic behavior in terms of he's superficially charming, he's manipulative, he lies constantly. That's all that means. Somebody who he may or may not have a conscience. I don't know. He certainly can make you feel like he does because he's very good at getting your sympathy. Anyway, Wanderlei is much more of a heart on your sleeve kind of guy, completely unsophisticated player, and here we are. I mean, this is a guy who came to fame as the axe murderer. I mean, I remember when I first saw him fighting bare knuckle in Brazil in the late 90s on VHS tapes that came in the mail. I mean, this was a scary cat, lowering and rolling his wrist before the fight and just complete caveman, completely brutal. And his fighting style was stomps and knees to the face, and kicks, soccer kicks to the head of down opponents. When he demolished Sakuraba repeatedly with extreme brutality. I mean, but that's what fans love. I mean, that's what people want to see. So there's nothing ignoble about Silva's fighting style. In fact, I think it was noble. I think his career was one of the greatest in MMA history. But this stuff at the end of his career is definitely a knock. I mean, he's definitely never going to be in the UFC Hall of Fame, and if there were an MMA Hall of Fame, this would make him a pretty questionable out. I mean, Pete Rose isn't in the Baseball Hall of Fame for something very similar to this, late career fuck-ups and a lifetime banning by one of the sport's preeminent authorities. So, there you go. Pretty sad day, all in all, for MMA. I mean, I hope Wanderlei continues to speak out, but I suspect, given the cynical timing of the release, that was just a smokescreen trying to take away, trying to appeal to fans one last time and try to distract from what he had to know was coming. So, sad way to go out, man. As Ice-T would say, you went out like a bitch. I mean, just a bummer. Anyway, this is Kid Nate. Got to sign off. We'll be back tomorrow. Eugene and I'll have the Care Don't Care for UFC preview for UFC 178, and then on Thursday, Dallas, Connor and Zane will have the in-depth UFC 178 MMA vivisection. Then Zane and I will have the 6th round on Saturday. Eugene will be back with Knuckle Up on Monday. Rinse and repeat, onward and upward with the MMA universe. This is Kid Nate at BloodyElbow.com. Remember, give us a like on YouTube. That's the thumbs up under the screen. Subscribe to YouTube, MMANation.com on YouTube. Follow me at Kid Nate on Twitter. Follow Bloody Elbow at Bloody Elbow on Twitter. Read me on BloodyElbow.com. And over and out. I'll see you next time. Adios, MMA aficionados.